Hello everyone, my name is Chinwe Russell and today I will be talking about the Negritude art movement. This video is part of our Doncaster art movement project where we talk about the history of art and the various styles and movements which has marked this sector. This program is sponsored by the Fighting Back Fund through Doncaster Council, and we say a big thank you to them. And over the past several weeks, many artists in Doncaster have been present in various art movements, from Baroque to Surrealism, Romanticism, Impressionism, digital art, ceramic art, and so on. Chances are that you have heard of many of the art movements. However, the history of art is a vast subject. It's quite big, with many different movements, influences, styles, inspirations, many of which are not really very well known. One of such movements is the Negritude movement, which was a literary and arts movement prominent in Paris in the 1930s. Though the early members of the Negritude movement understood the importance of being part of the community, however, they felt that this assimilation was based on the assumption that the European culture and civilization was superior to that of Africa. So from that statement, you can understand that the Negritude movement was led by young people from the African and the Caribbean countries who were living and working in Paris at the time. For many of these young people from Africa and the Caribbeans, this was a very comfortable ethos, and by that I mean the mass assimilation, irrespective of where you come from and your origins. One interesting fact is that the Parisian art scene of the 1930s was a very diverse and tolerant place. Artists and writers of all races and cultures practiced their craft side by side in harmony. It was in this setting that what was to become the international Negritude movement took hold. However, in the wider community at the time, away from the arts and literature and all that, it was a different story. There was growing tension due to fascism, racism, and the effects of the war were also some of the key factors in the Negritude consciousness. The early Negritude members or artists at the time saw their countrymen fighting and dying for a war that wasn't theirs, but also were also treated as inferiors in the battlefield. You can imagine how that made them feel. So they became increasingly aware of the struggles of black people, people of African origin, and beyond, firstly through slavery and then through colonial rule. It is through the studies of this fact and this history that the basic ideas of Negritude was born. So what is Negritude really? I struggle with saying the word. It's not an easy word to say. Negritude is a celebration of being black and being African, really being who you are, which is what the students want, what they were promoting in their community and beyond. The Negritude movement was the assertion of I am black, I am African, and my culture and history is as important as yours. It was a cry against the policy of blanket assimilation. It is also a recognition of the warmth of the African life, our closeness to nature, our strengths, the important role of our ancestral worship, our native cultures and the traditions of our people. The early Negritude movement believed that Africans living in a Western culture must look to their own cultural heritage to determine the values and traditions that are most useful in the modern world, and and above all, the value and dignity of African traditions and peoples must be asserted and not considered inferior. So basically, the Negritude movement is about you being in the Western, and as an African at the time, being in the Western environment, not being forced to abandon who you are, what your culture is, in favor of assimilating the culture of where you are, but working in harmony with your culture and the culture of where you are in order to create something magnificent. So what they were fighting for was to say that the fact that they were African artists and they have their indigenous culture doesn't mean that they were inferior to the country where they were. So it was a call for acknowledgement and for positive integration as opposed to negative integration. So that was really the beginning of the Negritude movement, and the movement started mainly in literature, but then expanded into arts. At the time, black students and artists from the French colonies in Africa and the Caribbean got together, and with the aim of promoting an appreciation of the history and culture of black people. They wanted to show that culture of the black people was as important as that of the whites. And when the Second World War began, leaders of the Negritude movement, when I say leaders, I mean people who were the artists who were promoting this at the time. They left Europe and went back to their homeland because of the war, and of course they took these strong ideas of identity and negritude back home with them. Now, after the war, Paris again became the center of negritude activities. Many artists from Africa and the Caribbean came back to Europe to study and to work. Among these were London students Frank Bolin. I'm sure you've heard of Frank Bolin. I think he had a big exhibition. I believe he's still alive. He had a big exhibition in Tate recently. So another artist was Aubrey Williams. You had Donald Luck. You had Ben Enwomo, who is a Nigerian artist. My family, I'm from Nigerian origin. And you also had Uzo Egon. At the time, African art was generally regarded as primitive art. And this created an intellectual barrier to the appreciation of their work. It also limited the opportunities that were available to African artists because they were considered, primitive art and so not part of the mainstream arts sector. And their work was not accorded the same importance as the works of European artists. Now, one of the leading voices of the Negritude movement was a young black Senegalese student called Leopold Sédar Senghor. Years later, he became the president of Senegal. So. He argued that though the black culture had a traumatic history, it must acknowledge its traditions and cultures, but could also be combined with an open approach to new ideas and concepts in the arts. There was, the other young black artist that I mentioned earlier on, called Ben Ewonwu from Nigeria, he went even further to cite examples of big name artists who were influenced by African cultures. Ben refused to accept an inferior position in the art world simply because he was an African artist. He argued that European artists like Picasso, we all know Picasso, Georges Braque, Vlaminck, who were influenced by African art, were widely celebrated and recognized, with no one questioning the artistry of their work and their place in mainstream art. And so he said, why should African artists, who in turn are influenced by Western ideas and cultures, be forced to stick to their traditional techniques and be excluded, relegated to, primitive arts, not important? That was the big question of this movement. Ben Ewonwu famously said this: I do not copy traditional art. I like what I see in the works of people like Giacometti, but I do not copy them. I knew he was influenced by African sculptures, but I will not be influenced by Giacometti because he was influenced by my ancestors. So that was very deep. Ben Ewonwu then called for the recognition of African art and artists on the same scale as their European counterparts. Ben Ewonwu himself had a very successful career. He traveled all over the world. He did lots of commissions. He did even I think a big statue of the Queen Elizabeth. He is regarded as a modernist African artist, and you can easily buy his works today. You just need a few £1,000,000, that's all. Not a lot to ask for. The Negritude art movement was the beginning of what is considered modernism in African art, a progression from primitivism to modernism, while retaining the vibrancy, rich cultural heritage, artistry, and the forms of the African culture. In recent years, actually, African art has become very topical, and African artists are becoming more and more sought after and quite mainstream, just like the early Negritude artists wanted. Today, there are a large number of modern African artists who combine their traditional culture, techniques, and color with a dose of Western concepts, Western concepts and ideas to create a wide range of artistic styles. African artists from, I look at art in my job as curator. I'm constantly looking at hundreds and hundreds of arts. You see a lot of African artists who are working in several different styles. So even myself, I consider myself an artist first and foremost. Color or where I come from, or being pigeonholed in one particular section, I'm not interested in that. When I create a piece of work, I do not consider my African origins before I start creating the work. I do not seek to be constrained into an expected type of art that an African should create. However, when you look at my pieces that I create, the nostalgia of my African roots and culture play a strong part in my work, which you can see in some of the images which form part of this presentation. These days, art galleries, art collectors, the general public art lovers worldwide travel from all over the world to visit some of the hugely popular art fairs in Africa. One of the most popular ones is the Lagos Art Fair. It's very, stunning, ultra modern and everything you can think of. And they go there to see and snap up the works of up and coming African artists. I am sure that Ben Ewonwu, wherever he is, and the other early Negritude artists will be really very proud of their legacy and all the fight, you know, that they fought to see this happen. And of course, what I have presented is a small introduction to this hugely fascinating and interesting subject, and I now invite you to explore this further in your own time. And once again, I would like to say thank you to Doncaster Council for sponsoring this project, through which the artists in Doncaster are explaining a little bit about the history of art, and you know, our sector help you to get an understanding of what art is all about and how it has come from where it was to where it's now. And the idea really is for you to gain you know, a basic understanding, so that when you know you go and see exhibitions, you'll be better informed. You'll be able to recognize, oh, this is, you know, done in the African style, or this is done in the Cubism style, or Fauvism, or digital art. It makes you feel more confident, you know, about talking about art. I know a lot of people be apprehensive about that, and also it could help you to start your own art collection, because art collections are quite important. They're a way to document history. That's all about Negritude for today, and I hope to see you soon for more videos on different art movements. And this is Chinwe Russell. Thank you for watching.